In today's podcast, I'm going to talk about how you can improve the rate at which you learn how to do cases. I've never covered this topic before in a podcast. I've covered allied topics, but this should be something new. And it comes out of a discussion I've had with a Nigerian client about how he can improve the rate at which he learns case technique prior to the calls we have where we practice how to apply those techniques. And the kind of discussion we had went something along the lines of this, where we were talking about food, actually. And he was telling me about his favorite dish, something called jollof rice, which is, for those of you wondering what jollof rice is, it's similar to paella, similar to biryani, the Indian dish mixed with vegetables and rice and meat and so on, and paella, which is a derivative of that. The point I was trying to explain to this candidate in a format you would understand is I pointed out to him that imagine that his mother was trying to teach him how to do this, right? She had two ways to do it. One is she could call him on the phone and explain to him how to do it, which means he'd have to take a lot of notes, ask a lot of clarifying questions, and obviously he's got to make sure that she understands his weaknesses in terms of how to cook, and then explains all the little steps required. Or the other technique is he could just watch his mother cook and replicate the technique. Now, when you're practicing cases, the analogy is directly applicable in the sense that I do find a lot of candidates, what they do is when they prepare, they do one of two things. They will set up Skype sessions of audio sessions with someone, and they will do a case, and then they'll expect the person to talk them through how to do the case, which is a little bit like learning how to do a complex dish in the kitchen by getting someone to talk you through it. The other approach they also do is they buy a lot of books, and they'll just memorize cases, and they hope to learn the technique. The problem with all these books is that they don't teach you how to break down problems from first principles, which is where you have to spend the bulk of your time. You need to learn how to break down problems from first principles. And books tend to focus heavily on frameworks, heavily on technique, but not how to develop the technique, right? So when you are practicing cases, what I advise you to do is this: if you really want to get your learning up to a very advanced level, even if you're dealing with a colleague or you're dealing with an ex-consultant or a current consultant, what you should do is don't just get them to talk you through how to do the case. It's important that you observe on a sheet of paper how they actually solve out and structure the logic behind their explanation. You learn a lot more by observing than just by listening. So while listening is good to understand key pointers, it's going to be really, really difficult for you to understand case technique unless you see how best practice is applied in solving cases. And for example, in the way we teach, we always give clients access to videos, or they have optional access to videos, because you have to observe how it's done. It'll take us forever to explain to a client how to lay out an estimation case, but it'll save us hours actually if they could watch the video in terms of how we lay out estimation cases. Now, it doesn't mean you have to watch videos to prepare, but what it does mean that when you are practicing with people, and especially when you're learning, make sure you get someone experienced to not just talk you through how they'll solve the case, but also show you on a piece of paper how they'd lay out their thinking and they lay out their structuring. Believe me, if you can get to that point of watching how someone lays it out, you'd learn far more. You'd be far more efficient than simply listening to them solve it. It's like trying to get complex instructions. It's like trying to learn math over the phone with a friend. It's very difficult. There's so many little nuances. But if you could have your friend next to you and she, for example, writes out the equations, the steps, and so on a sheet of paper, everything becomes a lot more clearer. So my advice is that when you are practicing cases, focus on observing as opposed to listening. And if you're in a position whereby you have to listen versus observing, maybe you're in a country where there's very few people to practice with, always get an experienced person you practice with to send you a photograph of their calculations and layout. You'd be shocked at the things that you are not getting from the verbal description.